I'm here today with Brian Bentz, President and Chief Executive Officer of PowerStream Inc. And before the break, we sort of touched very briefly on mergers and acquisitions and how you've grown the business. And mergers and acquisitions can be a really problematic sort of process when you're trying to build a strong culture. You've obviously achieved some success in building a strong culture, having won the 50 most engaged workplaces. Talk to us a little bit about, what's been involved in some of the mergers you've taken place, and more importantly, what are some of the struggles you've gone through and what you've done to try to overcome those barriers?
Yeah, they can be very challenging.
Yeah.
You're right. And, I guess the literature would say that a lot of them aren't successful.
Exactly.
And one of the things that is very important to establish up front is that what is the benefit that all of the stakeholders are going to see in this. Because if you have people who are concerned, whether it's an owner or a customer or an employee who's concerned about the repercussions of this transaction on them specifically, then that can potentially undermine the process. And it doesn't take many to potentially undermine the process. So it really is about having a very solid business case and making sure that everyone understands that business case and engaging especially the employees and letting them know, being honest with them in terms of what the plans are going forward and how everyone will be treated. And I think as long as you treat them fairly,
yeah,
and you disclose that up front in advance, and give them, advance notice of how you'll do it, then it diffuses the angst. And I'm talking really at the transaction stage, because you have two stages here.
Well, and I think, the communication and the transparency are two really, really critical issues. I've always believed, and my experience indicates that if you're truthful with people,
right,
and even if you have to deliver bad news, but if you're totally truthful with them and you talk about how you're going to manage it, how you're going to try to address some of the barriers, people are much more accepting.
They are.
And then the other thing is, the communication aspect. I find too many organizations think communication is, well, we're going to tell.
Yes.
And communication is supposed to be a dialogue. It's supposed to be a two-way. And when you have that honest conversation with people and then give them the opportunity to provide feedback, it's amazing what kind of great ideas they come up with.
They come up with great ideas, yes.
So give us some, share with us some of the real specific examples. I mean, when you've taken on, when you've merged with an organization, you're bringing two potentially different cultures together. What does PowerStream do to try to bring those two cultures together?
There's social events that I think that we do. We always have in the case of the original PowerStream event, we had quite a launch. And it was at Angus Glen Golf Course, and we brought everyone together, brought them all together in buses, and we had a very large celebration. And we wanted to come out of the gate with a pretty sort of positive momentum.
So as part of that celebration, what were some of the elements that you brought into that to ensure that positiveness was going to happen?
We embraced the legacy of you're starting new, but you can't forget the past.
Right.
So it really was sort of paying tribute to the past.
So an acknowledgement of what they brought to the party.
What they brought to the table, and everybody brought something different.
Yeah.
Every organization is different, it has its own culture, it has its own strengths and weaknesses, but acknowledging that. Acknowledging the people who came before us, who built those organizations to what they are today, and then thanking them for that, and then starting to look forward and being very positive about the future, and building that energy up to say that this organization will be better. Once you start rolling it out, you have to get to the granular level of work practices. So, and you have to be selective about it. So we looked at the IS infrastructure, and we looked at the work practices in terms of as granular as things as how do we connect a new customer?
Right.
How do we design and build a pole line? And there's different ways of doing it.
Sure, there would be.
What is our protection and control philosophy in the different areas? And we tried to cross-pollinate the cultures. So we would actually move one supervisor who was in one area into another area and vice versa,
Right.
so that they begin to learn. Over time, we started to consolidate the work groups. We built a new facility, a common facility. So if we had kept every facility that we had and all the legacy utilities, probably would have about 11.
Right.
We have 3 now.
Okay.
And I think that the logistics of where people work and the environment that they work in has a large impact on how they interact and how they perceive each other. So since we've built our South Operations Center at Addiscott, I think it's gone a long ways in terms of integrating the cultures and integrating the work practices of the legacy organizations.
Well, and I think the other thing you talked about is when you start to cross-pollinate, you know, if you've got 2 organizations and they do things slightly differently, I'm not suggesting either one was wrong, but
Right.
just different. What you ideally want to do is you want to kind of create a consistent
Yes.
approach to things, and that means that theoretically neither one are the way you're going to do it going forward.
No. And a lot of it is a function of risk tolerance, perceived risk tolerance, and acceptable level of risks within the organization. So it is a lot about having common sessions on the health and safety side, on the engineering design side, to say what is an accepted work practice, why we believe it's an accepted work practice, and like to your point earlier, not just telling, but
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
encouraging feedback to say, okay, you did it this way. What was the thinking behind that? Why did you, whether it's a secondary service, different ways of doing it, you can have, getting into the technical
Well, and I think the
ramifications,
thing
but-
is that the different ways of doing it, I mean, in your industry, clearly there's a higher level of risk.
There is.
But the truth of the matter is the philosophy carries just as well to a restaurant,
It
a
does.
retail store,
Yeah,
is
it really
about
does.
getting the folks together who are in the front line, know what the issues are,
Yeah.
giving them the opportunity to share their insights one with another,
Yeah.
and then deciding on the way we're going to do it as an organization. And that comes back to that competitive advantage. This is how we do it.
Yes.
And this is what sets us apart as a competitive advantage.
And then recognizing those people, the people who exhibit the behaviors that we want, which is really around, the teamwork, respect, and
the
performance.
leadership competencies.
The leadership competencies. Those people are exhibiting that. You shine the spotlight on
Yeah.
them, and you say those are the people. So we have, recognition and rewards. It's part of their incentive plan. Lots of different ways of saying, you're doing a good job. I mean, just saying it in a town hall session, that this person, we really want to recognize. We have our annual dinner dance, and we have we recognize employees for their leadership, community involvement, and innovation. Give them awards so they're recognized in front of all of their peers on what they've contributed, and then building on success. And making people feel that they're part of a winning team.
Yeah.
And so if they have that line of sight, what I spoke to when we first started, they have the line of sight to see how they can contribute to the success, and they feel part of that success, and they exhibit the behaviors and the culture that you want, you get what I describe as this flywheel effect.
Yes.
Where it just starts to build momentum and energy, and you get this engagement, and you just get this, you get something pretty special, actually, if it does work.
Yeah.
And we actually have had people in our outsiders come into our organization and say, they do sense that, we have an energetic and positive work environment, and that's what you want to build on.
Yeah, well,
It's
and
an
culture is
intangible.
something it's very tangible, and you
Yeah.
can see it, you can feel it when you walk into an organization. I want to come back to something you said just a little bit ago, before we started talking about the recognition programs, which I would like to spend a little bit more time on later. And that was about shining the light on people that have stepped up. And I guess the point I want to start this element with is that leaders within the organization are found at every level of the organization.
Right.
Leadership's not just like you and your
No,
executive
absolutely.
team. And I think that comes out of when you start to listen to people, that communication dialogue we talked about earlier. How do you go about try to intentionalize that? That's one of my favorite words, about intentionalizing it. You've seen, something works. Now, how do you make sure that it works across the organization? So without going too much into the recognition and award stuff, what are some of the techniques that you use within PowerStream to make sure that the great people that are stepping up and taking a leadership role, regardless of their title, are being encouraged to do that?
Yeah, well, I think that we start with our compensation system, performance incentive system, to make sure that when we establish our corporate goals for the year, that they filter down to the individual level, right through the organization. So we establish broad strategic corporate goals. They filter down into departmental goals, managerial, supervisor, staff. So it's all linked. And then once we do that, we have linkages, we have a planning session to make sure that the alignment and the resource allocation is appropriate. Because if you have every division doing their own resource planning, sometimes the requirement is greater than what you have available.
Well, and it creates the silo effect because you start fighting for resources as opposed to what the overall goals of the organization are.
That's
so I'm going to take another break here, Brian, and I want to come back to that because I love this alignment of goals, and I think that, again, everything we're talking about is applicable to any business, whether it's a 2 or 3 person business or hundreds of people like PowerStream. So we'll be right back.